to the fourth branch program. Glad you can make it. I am MD. This program is dedicated exclusively for those with common sense, a spirit of patriotism, and a determination for a more perfect union. Stay tuned as we begin the discussion of a very important, interesting, and enlightening topic. Hope to hear from you soon. Happy listening.
Hello everyone, I am MD and this is the fourth branch program. Welcome. We have embarked in a journey to discuss the two most important topics which define our society. One, race relations, more specifically, the interaction between blacks and white. And of course, the second one, which could be considered as the most important, which is the state of our democracy. Now, we have been talking about those two topics for the past few months. And of course, today we will continue that conversation in order to shed light on some aspect of the issues and also to explore solutions whenever there is a possibility of a solution. We do not have any illusion as to what we are able to achieve at the fourth branch. Our objective is to perfect the union. And we choose to do that by tackling one of the biggest obstacles to achieving that, which is ignorance. Now, we mentioned many times here, and at times we have individuals who felt insulted by the bluntness of pointing out who we think are ignorant, who we think are acting in an ignorant manner. Now, the purpose is not to insult individual, although we acknowledge that those type of approaches are somewhat insulting. But we have taken that approach because we have watched, we have observed others in other venues, in other organizations who have tried as best as they can to try not to insult people, to try not to upset people, because they're hoping that by using a glove type of approach, they would finally get to those individuals and eventually would manage to turn them around. This is not a spiritual program. We're not here to preach the gospel for you to change, to have a change of heart, to come to Jesus, or to become a better person, although that would be nice. The objective is rather to impart information, knowledge, which we hope would be valuable, would be taken at face value, and would be used wherever it is possible or necessary, especially for those who consider themselves as patriots, for those who see a reason or the importance of leaving a country better for future generations than just being a selfish or being selfish and enjoy whatever that they have today. There was a time when well, at the very least, we've read about it, that parents used to sacrifice their lives, used to sacrifice their own existence in order to ensure a better future for their children, for their offspring. But unfortunately, with the passing of time, we've seen just the opposite, that parents now are competing with their children, and society has changed, not for the better, but rather for the worse. And ironically, despite the fact that we have been making a lot of progress in terms of science, in terms of technology. Here in the United States, race relation has not improved an iota. Of course, a lot of people would disagree with that because, well, we can look back in the past. We say, well, blacks used to be slaves. They are no longer. So progress. At least it looks like it. But relatively speaking, this is not true. And as we continue the conversation about race relation, it will become pretty obvious that's the case. But we're not here to necessarily solve race relation, although that would be nice. And in terms of our democracy, we're hoping that people would have better understanding, better knowledge of legislations of the very individual that they've elected to office to do things to better their lives, to better their future, to better the lives of their children and their grandchildren. At least they're able to see a little bit clearer and able to make even better decisions in the future. As such, we start today by looking at the state of affairs in our country, the state of affairs of our democracy. We mentioned many times here that ignorance is the biggest threat to any democracy. In fact, JFK said that the ignorance of one voter in a democracy impairs the security of us all. Now, there is no doubt about it. There is no debate about that. But the question is, who are the ignorant who put our freedom in jeopardy? And in terms of race relation, why are we still fighting, if we ought to use the term, for equality? More than a century beyond slavery, yet state of affairs in terms of race relation in America seems to be nowhere beyond slavery. We talk a lot about the problem that blacks in particular have confronted in the United States. If you are here for the first time, first, welcome. And let me set the stage for you. War on blacks is a topic which discusses race relation in general, but we also take trips to the past. At this point, slavery, the era of slavery, in order to understand the roots of the problem that we're discussing today. Now, I would strongly encourage you to visit the People Branch YouTube channel in order to take a look at, more specifically, at the past, at the archive about this particular topic. We have already produced a lot of videos that provide a lot of information about this particular topic as we making the journey from slavery to modern time. So we're not going to repeat everything that we talked about before. So we strongly encourage you to head to YouTube, go to youtube.com, as you see on step 1, and on step 2, type people branch, one word, people branch, and press enter, and it will provide you with the image you see on the left hand side, which is called image 1. Now, if you click on image 1, it will display image 2, which is a list of video that already produced and archived on the People Branch YouTube channel. You can go and look for video under the banner either War on Blacks, Institutionalized Racism, Race Relation. Now, if it is the topic you are interested in, now those videos have discussion of that topic all over the place. Now, we are at the point, what we call a bridge between slavery and modern time, the Civil War. And we have been talking about that at least for the past few episodes, in which we're showing not only the division in the country in terms of the two groups that have drawn a line in the sand and they have taken position for or against. Now, for those of you who are either too young or who are not really interested in history, who may have heard of Civil War, but we know that it's a war that took place right here in the United States. Of course, you may also know that that war had something to do with slavery with blacks. But beyond that, you may not care. Now, the Civil War was obviously a fight between two groups in the country, the pro-slavery groups and the anti-slavery group. As I mentioned here many times, there are two major groups, two groups of whites in the country. There are millions of whites who are racist and who discriminate. And there are millions of whites who are not racist and who do not discriminate. And I also pointed out more than I can count that that's what makes the discussion of race relations a very difficult topic, because it's not easy to meet someone, a white individual, and be able to decide that that person is racist and that other person is not, because nothing provides that information when you meet an individual. That's the reason today we are still talking about racism, discrimination in America. So why? Now, I like to make the distinction between just racism, between a racist individual, and institutionalized racism. As you see on the screen, that I make it a point to at least to attempt to establish that distinction. And the reason for that is because an individual who is racist doesn't affect anyone's life, at least not on the surface. I've been using the example that if my neighbor next door, white and racist, I could not care less, because he doesn't put food on the table for me. He doesn't change anything about me. It doesn't make me any less or any better. It doesn't make me any richer or any poorer. It doesn't make me any healthier or any sicker. So the individual who is racist, whether I meet that individual where I live, at the supermarket, at the school, at the workplace, it just doesn't impact my life. But I put a lot of emphasis on institutionalized racism, because not only it impacts my life, but it impacts the lives of actually all blacks. And that should not be ignored. Any black individual and any decent white individual should be concerned about institutionalized racism. Now, because we're talking about slavery at this time, there are a lot of detail as to the many factors that helps keep or even make it more permanent than it should have been. And those factors, we will discuss them, and we will explore solution or venues or ways to get rid of those factors, because the three major factors which must be present in order to solve a problem is firstly acknowledging, identifying the problem. You cannot solve a problem if you do not accept that there is a problem, or if you do not acknowledge there is a problem, or if you cannot identify the problem. So that first step that first factor ought to be present. And I mentioned many times here already that the problem with racism and discrimination is the fact that even in the acknowledgement part of finding of the solution, there are various degrees of acknowledgement. If you talk to blacks in general, you'll find out that the problem is present everywhere. It's in every corner, in every aspect of life, everywhere that blacks go, everywhere that blacks are, they simply cannot escape that problem. Now, if you talk to whites, depending on where they're at, because some whites, as I had conversation with a few that I've never met or interacted with blacks, the only place they've seen blacks is on TV. Now, those individuals, they have different degrees of acknowledgement in terms of the problem. And of course, you find whites who have interacted with blacks, and they too have various degrees of acknowledging the problem. Some would tell you that the problem is there, but it's not really a big problem. Only the white nationalists or the white supremacists. And others would simply tell you, yes, the problem is indeed a problem in the United States, but they would not have the same level of acknowledging the problem, the same level of understanding of the problem as blacks do. Now, because of that, we're already at a disadvantage in the first aspect of solving the problem. But we're getting there, because that's the reason we took that trip to the past, in order to bring those information into the conversation, in order to at least to try to widen the level of acknowledgement among various groups. The second aspect, of course, is to find the roots of the problem. Now, you accept that there is a problem, you acknowledge that there is a problem, and now we ought to find the roots of the problem. And that's also the reason where we add in this discussion, we're talking about slavery. Now, we've pretty much almost done with that aspect because, as I mentioned, we're now on the Civil War bridge. This is that bridge. It's a long, huge, costly, bloody bridge which links the past and the future. Well, actually, I should say when I say the past, I mean specifically slavery time, and future, we're talking about today, and of course, the time beyond slavery. So it is a large, long bridge, and plenty of problem have happened on that bridge because a lot of blacks and whites have tried to cross that bridge, and many did not make it to the other side. And we are at this point talking about the Civil War. The Civil War was the last, what you would call the last attempt, the last effort by anti-slavery, the last effort by those who value human being, the last effort by those who are decent individual to put an end to a practice which we have no words to explain the behavior of those individuals who subjected other groups, other individual blacks to that kind of treatment. And when we return, we will show you how costly when people make mistakes, and in that case, I don't know if we should call it mistake because there were so many opportunities for white slave owners to at least come to their senses and decide we got to put an end to that. But instead, and we're not talking about just individuals who did not go to school. We're not talking about illiterate. We're not talking about people who did not have a college education. We're not talking about just ignorant people in the common sense of the word. We're talking about senators, congressmen, people who had college degree, went to school, rallying on one side, fighting to keep slavery around. That's what we're talking about. And if you think because slavery is over, then all that is behind us, then those individuals no longer exist, or they learned their lesson and now they become better individuals. Think again. The reason we're talking about racism today, the reason we're talking about discrimination, the reason we're talking about inequality is because those individuals, those same groups, well, loosely speaking, because I cannot know for sure those are the same group, but one thing I can know, I can say for certain that some of those people who come from that lineage of slave ownership, they continue in with that same mentality. I remember even during Obama's campaign for the presidency of the United States, a woman in the South said, I'm paraphrasing here, that we should never vote for a black man because they should stay in their place. Now, I say that just to provide a context that even up to today, we have those same individuals, descended most likely of slave owners, who continue to harbor a sentiment against blacks, and most of them, I guarantee you that they do not have any idea of the real information about the slavery, because information were passed down to them, and bad information. And we know that because our conversation with some individual clearly tell us that the only thing that they got is propaganda by those who were there at the time and who decided that we're not going to lose this luxury, if you like, of having slaves, of having blacks slaving for us for nothing. We're going to make certain that we destroy their lives in the process.
Hi, I am MD, host of the Fourth Branch program. War on Blacks is a new topic added to the Fourth Branch programming in order to discuss the intricacies, the complexities of race relations in America. The goal is threefold. 1. To bring attention to the various forms of prejudice, discriminations, and racism in the country. 2. To expose the undeniable presence of such in every aspect of life and every corner of our society. 3. To extricate us all from the ignorance, the indifference, or the complicity. The ultimate objective is to make the discussions of those issues, racism, prejudice, discrimination, a normal part of our lives. Then, and only then, will we, as a society, be able to eradicate the problem. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Nothing in all the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity." Abraham Joshua Shaw exclaimed, "Racism is man's gravest threat to man, the maximum of hatred for the minimum of reason." Join me in the journey to restore equality. Or would you please get out of the way? Thank you.
I mentioned earlier that I am not concerned about a racist individual, but I'm overly concerned about institutionalized racism. Now, as we're moving towards modern time and leaving slavery behind, you will start to understand the real culprit behind institutionalized racism. It's something that it wasn't accidental. It was, you would say, it was almost a revenge of the white in the South, because of the fact that they lost of the war, and they lost the war, meaning slavery ended, and what also that meant that they could no longer rely on free labor to continue to enrich themselves. But as it is, you see today, there has always been in the United States of America this idea of blaming the victim. Blacks were slaves, tortured, humiliated, executed, hung, forced to work 18 hours a day. By any analysis, blacks were victims. But for, I guess, reason that only maybe the whites can understand, there is always a turning the table to blame the very individuals, the very groups that were victimized, and now blame them for their problems. And that continue up to today. And we will see that because there are plenty of examples, plenty of opportunities for us to talk about real life, real modern life type of situation, not only to pinpoint problems that linger from what was said beyond slavery, but explore also opportunities, explore possibilities rather, as to how do we put an end to that. Institutionalized racism is a system which nurtures, condones, or even promotes racist behavior, action, and languages. That's what institutionalized racism is. We gave example before, and of course, you will most likely be tired of hearing example because we will continue to give you examples of what is institutionalized racism and who are behind fueling that war against black. Now, slavery was the ultimate, where white slave owners not only took advantage of blacks and forced them to work for free, but they did not have any humanity. There is no way to explain what those people were, because today when we hear that someone kidnapped another individual and killed the individual, we as a society, we it becomes almost it is difficult for us to express the anger that we have towards that individual. Now you imagine for almost 400 years, you have whites subjecting blacks on a daily basis to treatment that one cannot imagine. Things that you see on screen, you would think, oh, it's just a movie. But blacks were subjected to those type of treatment. Which brings me to why we had the Civil War. Because as mentioned before, in the United States of America, there have always been two groups of individuals, two groups of whites. Those who are racist, bigots, who discriminate, and up to today, a number of those same individuals pass that kind of sentiment to their offspring, and you find those same individuals continuing in that path. And racism, by the way, is a behavior, the thought of the action of one individual, in that case a white individual, towards another, which is based exclusively on external factors such as skin color. Because the white individual who doesn't like blacks doesn't have any other factor besides the fact that blacks are blacks and that individual is white. There is no other factor, because there is nothing that individual knows about that other individual who is happen to be black for the white individual to make the decision not to like the black individual. It's just purely, exclusively based on external factors. Now, put a big question mark on that, because as we move towards discussing this in greater detail, you'll find out that it's not completely true what I just said, because there is the whites who discriminate against blacks, the whites who are racist, they have baggages with them. And they've been passing that from one generation to the next. And when you find a white individual who is racist, if you talk to that white individual, you will find out exactly what I just said about not having any other factor but the skin color, that there is a story behind that kind of sentiment. Nevertheless, the anti-slavery led by Abraham Lincoln decided that it was time to put an end to slavery. And as I mentioned before, we singled out three very specific individuals to talk about. We already talked about Robert Lee, who was an advisor to Jefferson Davis. Robert Lee, you may have recalled that the white nationalists in Virginia, Charlottesville, they were, even in New York, they were there to protect the statue of Robert Lee. Now, why did we want to talk about Robert Lee? Because there were many other commanders, generals who fought on the side of the Confederate States, but we chose to talk about Robert Lee in particular because he was a very conflicted individual. Despite the fact he decided to fight on the side of the Confederate States, but we also acknowledge that Robert Lee had his doubt about the way that slaves were treated. We talk about that again. If you want to the detail about this particular aspect of the conversation, again, I strongly encourage you to head to People Branch YouTube channel, and there you'll find a previous video made that would provide that information. And the next person we talked about was Jefferson Davis. Jefferson Davis was the president of the Confederate States, kind of the individual who would be the first president of that other country they were trying to create. Now, that other country happened to be the country they were split, the state that they were trying to split from the United States in order to enforce the slavery, in order to make sure slavery continue to exist. Now, the state in red were the Confederate States. The state that you seen in pink in your screen, those were states that sided with the Union. The Union was the other side. The Confederate state wanted slavery to continue to strive in the South, but the Union wanted to end slavery. Now, the pink state were the state that allowed slavery, but at the same time sided with the Union to fight against the Confederate state. Now, the last person we talked about was Abraham Lincoln. That was the man that signed the executive order, signed the Emancipation Act to put an end to slavery. Now, as mentioned before, slavery was the end of slavery, putting an end to slavery. The Civil War was costly. It was costly on both sides. It's a war that lasted from 1861 to 1865. It was bloody. People died on both sides. Many hundreds of thousands of people died. And I did urge you to pause for a moment and think about what it meant for those who wanted to keep slavery around. What they had to do in order to keep slavery in the United States. It's as if people who are doing evil, there is nothing that happened, that there is nothing that you can tell them to get them to see the light. It's unbelievable, isn't it? There was absolutely nothing that anyone could tell those who decided slavery must continue, for them to see the light and say, God, we're going to lose our lives over something wrong that we're doing? Not a single individual. Instead, they created a whole new country with a president, a vice president, their army, their general, their congressmen, their senators. They created a brand new country in order to enforce the idea of keeping slavery alive. Now, in case you don't get that, it is mind-boggling to me in particular, because every time that I think about that time in history, and trying to understand that despite many opportunities that were offered to the white slave owners, to those who condoned, who nurtured the idea, despite that, they were willing, and they did, put their lives on the line to keep slavery around. They went to great length to do that. And casualties on that breach, there were plenty of casualties. Now, for the people who died on the anti-slavery side, we can say, in all fairness, those people could be considered as heroes, because they were fighting for a noble cause, to end slavery. And the people who died fighting to keep slavery around, we can only say that they should go to hell. Oh yes, because it is impossible to grasp the understanding of human being, especially those individuals who consider themselves Christian and who could not at any point before the Civil War, during the Civil War, even beyond the Civil War, acknowledge that they were doing something evil. Yes, they should go straight to hell for fighting to keep slavery around. That's impossible to grasp, that someone, no one, not a single individual, had the foresight, had the understanding and say, gosh, what we're doing is wrong. No, of course not. Now, beyond slavery, you would think that there would be some soul searching, and that's where the individual that I mentioned earlier, which is Robert Lee, is different from all those other people, because despite the fact that he sided with the Confederate state, he was very conflicted about the very aspect of slavery. He understood that the South needed slavery for their economy to strive, but at the same time, he did not condone the idea of the type of treatment that were being inflicted on the slave. That's why we say he was kind of a different breed. In fact, after he suffered defeat, he acknowledged his mistake, he apologized, and he even reapplied to get his United States citizenship back. He was a very different individual. But for the most part, all those people who fought to keep slavery, they had no remorse. They felt that that war should have gone on and on until they won. And that, ladies and gentlemen, the type of individual who today make up the bulk of those who are racist, of those who continue to discriminate. It was a shame that all of them didn't die, because maybe we would have a whole different country to have all the races completely wiped out. Maybe the country would have been very different. Maybe there would have been no reason to talk about racism in the United States. But unfortunately, many of them survive, and the story that they passed to their offspring survived up to today.
Hi, I am MD, host of the Fourth Branch program. War on Blacks is a new topic added
to the fourth branch programming in order to discuss the intricacies, the complexities of race relations in America. The goal is threefold. One, to bring attention to the various forms of prejudice, discrimination, and racism in the country. Two, to expose the undeniable presence of such in every aspect of life and every corner of our society. Three, to extricate us all from the ignorance, the indifference, or the complicity. The ultimate objective is to make the discussions of those issues, racism, prejudice, discrimination, a normal part of our lives. Then, and only then, will we, as a society, be able to eradicate the problem. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Nothing in all the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity." Abraham Joshua Shaw exclaimed, "Racism is man's gravest threat to man, the maximum of hatred for the minimum of reason." Join me in the journey to restore equality. Or would you please get out of the way? Thank you. One of the biggest aspect of the problem that the country has been going through, if we acknowledge that's the case, because as we have found out that a number of individuals don't seem to think that's the case. But let me start a different way. Let me ask the question, how would you save a drowning man who is convinced he is a great swimmer, but has not swum a single day in his life? How do you save someone like that? How do you convince that individual who is drowning that you need help and you cannot swim, but the person convinced that he is a great swimmer? Now, here's another way of thinking about it. How can a doctor save a cancer patient who is convinced aging is responsible for his deteriorating health? How could a doctor help somebody like that? Now, in both examples, it may not be possible at all to save either man or woman. You see, the state of our democracy is in jeopardy. Our country is in crisis. But the very individuals who have plunged the nation in this predicament swear on their offspring they did the right thing. And it doesn't matter a bit if they made the wrong choice. Quite a dilemma. Such is the predicament the country is in today. Now, that should not be a problem because per our Constitution, there is a remedy for that problem. But sadly, those who are called leaders in the Republican Party have long abandoned any principle, walk away from any value, and they all resorted to politics of fear and deception. How can you save a drowning man who is convinced he can swim his way out of the ocean, although he has not swum a single day in his life? Ignorance, they say, is the biggest threat to any democracy. However, it's the ignorant who are ignorant of their own ignorance which threaten to destabilize even the most democratic form of government. There it is in the United States of America. Millions of people went to the poll in 2016 to vote in office an individual who doesn't have, who is unfit to be president, who doesn't have the knowledge, the understanding, or cannot even acknowledge his shortcoming. But all that, as mentioned, we have remedy for. The framers of the Constitution did not leave us dry, hanging, and not having anything or any way of solving that problem. The legislative branch. But as we've seen the past 2 years, Republican legislators proved beyond reasonable doubt they could not care less about the United States of America, because all they were interested in is to save their own political career at all costs, at any cost, to the detriment of the country. The Constitution be damned. This is not a political diatribe. It is what has happened to the United States of America for the past 2 years, that Republicans were completely in control of all levels of the government. They could have saved the United States of America from plunging into the predicament it's in, because the Constitution provides us a way out of it. Now we understand why the constituent could not possibly see anything wrong with what they did. The biggest problem is when the ignorant are ignorant of their own ignorance. You cannot expect any individual, just like we showed you earlier, the individuals who were fighting to keep slavery around never at any point had the foresight or the understanding, the knowledge to realize what they were doing was wrong. This is not the first time. Yes, the ignorant are ignorant of their own ignorance. So we cannot expect, we cannot hope that they could turn around and realize that they've done something wrong. But those individuals we call leaders, those individuals elected in office, those individuals who took an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States, those Republican legislators. They have acted exactly the same way as the individuals who were fighting to keep slavery around. They did not care what happened to the country. They did not care whether what they were doing was right or wrong. As far as they were concerned, what they chose to do, that's what they would do, because them be them the Constitution. The hell with patriotism. George Washington did warn us about those type of individuals. He said we should always be careful about those with a posture of pretended patriotism. Yes, George Washington foresaw exactly this moment in time when you have elected officials, legislators, congressmen, senators who have completely abandoned the Constitution of the United States just to attend to their own selfish agenda. And when I return, I will show you that they have resorted completely, exclusively to the politics of fear, to the politics of deception. And you'll see why in just a moment.
Ignorance, they say, is the biggest threat to any democracy. And indeed, it is. Plato, a Greek philosopher born in 427 BC, said that ignorance is the root and stem of all evil. Today, members in the Republican Party wear ignorance as a badge of honor, while the rest of the country watch powerless the destruction of a country which was once the envy of the world. The media is the enemy of the country, said Donald Trump. The Democrat legislators are obstructionists for not going along with everything the president wants. The Department of Justice is biased for investigating corruption in the Trump administration. This is the United States of America. Any question?
I am MD, host of the Fourth Branch program, inviting you to join me every Saturday at 10:30 a.m. and every weekday at 2 p.m. for discussions of social political issues and to dissect the meaning and the importance of current events, as well as to understand topics of legislations. The Fourth Branch Project is not associated with any political party, and we at the Fourth Branch do not have any political agenda or aspiration. Our ultimate objective is to work towards achieving a more perfect union by removing ignorance, the biggest obstacle to our democracy. Stay with us. We will be right back.
The Fourth Branch Podcast is brought to you in collaboration with the People Branch publication, which can be found on the People Branch website, located at peoplebranch.org. That's peoplebranch.org. That's peoplebranch.org website, in which you will find a number of very interesting articles. My name is Mike Duchesne, MD for short. I hope you have a great afternoon or a great evening, whichever it happens to be. Hopefully you can join me again next time for another interesting episode of this podcast. That was the Fourth Branch, live from New York. Good day.